Good morning. Javier Becerra, Chairman of the House Democratic Caucus, joined by our Vice Chairman of the Caucus, Joe Crowley of New York, and we're pleased to be joined by a gentleman who's really championing the issue of defending the rights of people in over 100,000 people in Flint, Michigan, who are trying to figure out where they're going to get their drinking water on a day-to-day basis. Dan Kildee from Michigan has been fighting this for quite some time, before we started hearing about it here in Washington, D.C., and we're glad he's joining us as well. Today we had a caucus meeting where we discussed the situation in Flint. We discussed the introduction of the Federal Aviation Administration reauthorization bill. We discussed a number of things, but we spent most of our time discussing the federal budget, because we had the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, Sean Donovan, attend today and give us the outlines of the President's budget, which we've been told our Republican colleagues in the majority here in the House are not going to let the Director of OMB testify about, to tell us what's in that budget. It seems very irresponsible. It seems very curious that the Congress would not want to examine the President's budget, but that is where we are. I wanted to mention a couple of things that I believe are very important, because budgets are about priorities, and we're hearing that our Republican colleagues are not prepared to support legislation, especially the legislation introduced by our colleague, Mr. Kildee, that would provide emergency relief, immediate relief to those families in Flint, Michigan, because there's no level of lead that you can have in water that is safe. And we know so many families have already been poisoned by that lead contamination. And so we need to do something. We need to do something quickly. Director Donovan said today that the President would be supportive of an emergency supplemental appropriations bill to help the people of Flint, Michigan. We hope that our colleagues in the House and the Senate on the Republican side will heed the call. We're going to have a hearing today in the Democratic Steering and Policy Committee to discuss the Flint crisis. We invited the Governor Snyder of Michigan, but he declined once again to come to Washington, D.C. to tell us what his folks did or didn't do that led to this crisis. And so it's all about priorities, whether it's your budget or whether it's providing with families in America with safe drinking water. Who would have believed that in the 21st century we'd be talking about a place in America where families can't drink their own water, can't bathe in their showers because the water is contaminated? That's where we are, and this is a man-made crisis, and people should step to the plate and stand accountable for what they do if they want to lead their state or their region of the country. And so we're pleased that we at least have one of the leaders, Dan Kildee, with us today. But let me first yield to our Vice Chairman, Joe Crowley, for his comments.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, was pleased that Sean Donovan was able to come before the Democratic Caucus this morning to talk about the priorities of our President and our party, and the vision and the values that are expressed in the budget that he's put forward. In particular, I want to highlight my joy in seeing boosting for child care funding for working families, a focus on retirement security as well in the budget, and also addressing the issue of Puerto Rico and the myriad of issues that they're dealing with in this budget was also heartening. I think that the White House gets it. They understand what needs to be done to attack that issue. But immediately out of the box, our Republican colleagues have once again shown and demonstrated it's about politics. I don't rightly understand why denying Sean Donovan coming before the House and talking about the budget and the priorities the President has. It's the first, as the Chairman mentioned, not since 1975 has this happened. And this is exactly the shenanigans the American people are tired of. They're tired of seeing this over and over again play out in Washington. They want to see us get down to work and get the work done. And instead, they're playing games once again. And I'm also very pleased to have Dan here with us as well, because I think an issue that the President's zeroing in on as well is Flint, Michigan. his hometown. And Dan Kildee has been one of the leaders here in the House in bringing this issue to our attention. But this isn't just an issue for Flint, Michigan. This isn't just an issue for Michigan. This is an issue of our country, the values of our country. This is drinking water. And this is, you know, it's almost mind-boggling. Again, as the chairman has mentioned, the 21st century that we're actually talking about this is just outrageous. And I have said before, I believe that the governor and his administration have bankrupted their ability to deal with this. In fact, in many respects, they've helped cause this problem. And so I think this does need a national answer and address. And I hope that my Republican colleagues put the politics aside. Let's find out exactly what happened here and how we can prevent this from happening in the future to the Flints all around our country. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it over to Dan Kildee. Dan.
Thank you, Joe. I'll be brief and be happy to answer any questions as well with my colleagues. To be clear, the Flint situation is a result of bad decisions by state government. The appointment of an emergency manager to suspend democracy and make decisions for Flint led to this question when they changed to this highly corrosive water source without any real science applied. And then the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality failed to protect public health, and even when it was brought to their attention, failed to take the necessary steps to ensure that drinking water was safe in Flint. It's incumbent upon us, first of all, acknowledging the state failure, to act where we can act, to do two things. One, to provide relief to the people of Flint. This is a disaster, and it's a threat to the very livelihood of the people who live there in the city, the community itself. 9,000 children poisoned by their own government. We also have to do what we can, take steps to ensure that this doesn't happen again, because this is not just about Flint. It's about this whole country. So as was mentioned, we'll have a hearing today. The Democratic Steering and Policy Committee will hear from a number of people from Flint, the pediatrician who's one of the whistleblowers, the school superintendent, our mayor, other experts on municipal finance and drinking water, to help us understand exactly what we need to do to make it right for the people of Flint. I've been consulting with these folks, and my consultation with them has led to the supplemental appropriation that I have drafted and have introduced, which would provide $765 million from the federal government, matched by an equal number from the state. And I can describe that in more detail if people are interested. Also, we are taking steps to strengthen the EPA's authority over state agencies like the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality that refuse to act to protect public health. With a piece of legislation that will be on the floor today that would not only empower but require the EPA to provide public notice if a state agency fails to provide public notice when data shows that there is a problem with lead levels in water. This is one of the ways we could have prevented this had there not been confusion about the clear authority of the federal agency when a state has primacy for enforcement to essentially blow the whistle on the state failure. This legislation that will go to the floor today would correct that. You know, Flint's my hometown. It's a strong community. We've been through a lot. We've never been through anything quite like this. And it's a situation that requires a response equal to the gravity of the problem. The governor has been woefully delinquent in his responsibility to make it right for the people of Flint. The people of Flint are American citizens. And if the governor won't correct the mistakes that he made, we're going to have to do everything we can here at the federal level to get people in Flint the help that they deserve. With that, thank you, and turn it back to Javier.
Yeah, thank you. We'll take questions. Yep.
Right, so what we, in consulting with everybody that we've talked to at home, the failure to take care of clean drinking water is going to cost, if we get it right for the people of Flint, over $1.5 billion over 10 years, because this is a long-term issue. The impact is long-term. The $765 million that I've suggested would be the federal share, with a requirement, if enacted, that the state of Michigan provide an equal amount. so far what the governor has proposed, while, you know, I certainly appreciate help from my hometown, it's pretty hard to be appreciative of a less than adequate response to a problem that the state itself created. They broke my city. They poisoned the kids in the city, and now are trying to provide barely enough to look like they're trying to solve a problem when they're not even coming close to it. That's the figure, and you know, and based on our discussions with public health, educational, behavioral specialists, infrastructure needs, that's the number.
Other questions?
Mr. Kildee, so this follows up on this. The governor is expected to announce a new budget today. They're talking about $195 million. Your view is that that's a drop in the bucket towards what's needed?
Well, it's not enough. It's not enough to make it right. And, you know, it's rare that we have a circumstance where a situation like this is traceable to clearly identifiable decisions made by public officials. But the decision of the governor to appoint this emergency manager, who acted under his authority to change the water source, the willful decisions by people within the Department of Environmental Quality to ignore the law and actually try to hide the facts, means that we have a responsible party. And when we have a responsible party, they're required not just to give out of some sense of charity or largesse, they're morally required to make it right. And that's why I think, while, you know, back home, it's difficult for folks to sort of get their heads around, well, what does $195 million mean? We spent the time to figure out what it will take to make it right for the people of Flint, and the number is far larger than that. And just to give you some sense of scale, the money that the governor has proposed is barely more than what the people of Flint have paid for water that poisoned their children, just to kind of get a sense of the scale of what he is proposing.
Just to, you know, on one hand, you know, you made the point that this is a state-created problem. Why is there a federal role here? Because, you know, we've been talking about this in the Senate for a couple of weeks now. The Republicans say, well, this is a state problem that, you know, when we stipulate that the state created this, it's the state's responsibility to fix it. Why should the federal government have the responsibility to do, I guess, pick up half?
Partly because these are American citizens and they have the right to turn to their federal government when they are in need, but mostly because I have no confidence, nor do the people of Flint have confidence, that the governor is going to even come close to doing what's necessary to give these people a chance. And so in a perfect world, in an ideal world, people would take responsibility for their mistakes. But apparently that lesson that I learned when I was, you know, a very young child has not fully sunk in to some of the public officials in the state of Michigan. You know, when you make a mistake, you apologize for it first. And the governor did that, and we appreciated it. But I was taught when I was a kid that if you have it within your power to correct your mistake, to make it up to those whom you wronged, you have a moral obligation to do that. And that's why this is such an important question. He hasn't done that. Governor of Michigan has treated this as if it's a public relations problem for him, not a public health crisis for 100,000 people.
Yes.
What do you think about Bernie Sanders' win last night in New Hampshire, and what does it mean for him? Do you think he's electable?
I think that's directed at
I don't.
you, Dan. I think we can all answer
look
quickly.
forward to welcoming Mr. Sanders and Flint to Flint.
Competition is great. High turnout is great. Enthusiasm on the part of voters, Democrats or Republicans, is great. Holding those who want to run for elected office accountable is great. Believing that in November we're going to have some exciting results because it'll be a high level of turnout throughout the country is great. We applaud and congratulate Senator Sanders on his victory. There are many states to come, and that's what you want to see. For those of us who are frustrated by dropping numbers of voters every election cycle, this reminds me of 2008 when you had a high turnout. This reminds me of the days when John Kennedy and others got people inspired to come out and vote. This reminds me of when Bill Clinton got folks out there and energized. I think it's great. I believe on the Democratic side, Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders are going to have vigorous debates. I believe that Hillary Clinton will be our nominee. She's proven that she's tested. She has the values that we need to really help people who are struggling, who want to earn more money, not just see more jobs, but earn more money, who want to go to college and not be debt-ridden at the end of their 4 years of college. And so from my perspective, I think it's great to see this debate take place. It's interesting to watch on the Republican side. I won't make any guesses what happens there, but good for them if they get good turnout as well. Make it into an interesting November election.
You mentioned that you support Hillary Clinton. Exit polls said that voters don't really trust her, and she certainly had a big problem connecting with young voters. Is that going to be a problem for her going forward? And what does she do correctly?
There were thousands of people in New Hampshire who voted for her, who believe in her. There are going to be the same type of enthusiasm as you go throughout the country. I'll be in Nevada this weekend working on her behalf. I think we're going to find lots of enthusiasm there. I still feel good that this is going to be a great election in November for Democrats, not just for the next president, who I believe will be Democrat, but for those of us in the House who believe it's time that we had some sanity here, where we really did justice to people like in Flint, Michigan, or in making investments in the things that count versus giving tax breaks to the very wealthy. I think this is going to be good. And so let's go at it. And I think Secretary Clinton and Senator Sanders would tell you the same thing. Let's have a good competition. Let me let my colleagues respond. I'm sorry?
How is she going to correct that perception?
To me, Hillary Clinton is, if she's just Hillary Clinton, I think she'll be able to prove to people that she has earned a chance to be the next president, that she's earned their vote. And I believe that at the end of the day, what's going to happen here is that people will make a judgment on who is best prepared to lead them and make the kind of change they want to see. And in my book, I think that's Hillary Clinton. So you want a good quarterback? Hillary Clinton would be a really good quarterback. And we see the value of having a seasoned, experienced quarterback, the difference it makes when we saw the Super Bowl this past weekend. Let me let my colleagues respond as well.
I think it's important to note, I think, no one ever walks into the White House. It's never a cakewalk. I think this notion or idea that's been somehow built up that somehow she's the crowned candidate, that was never true. And what it's turned into is what Democratic primaries always are. They are pretty competitive events. So she has acknowledged last night that she has a lot of work to do to gain their support, but she's up to it, and she wants to do that. And she wants to demonstrate why she, and I think she's also expressed, as we have, the excitement that Bernie has been able to create amongst young people in the country as well. That's something I think we'll all tap into successfully come November, including soon-to-be President Hillary Rodham Clinton.
Let me make sure Mr. Kildee has a chance to respond if he wishes to.
Well, I can just say this. Based on my experience with Secretary Clinton, she'll do fine. When she was in the middle of a campaign in New Hampshire, she suspended that, came to Flint, Michigan to sit with the people who are suffering and struggling. That's all I need to know about Hillary Clinton, to know whether or not she's prepared for this office, and the campaign will bear that out.
Deirdre?
I think it's game on, She, I think, is prepared to do what she needs to do to win this election. It's now on to South Carolina, it's on to Nevada, and the rest of the country. We've heard from Iowa, we've heard from New Hampshire. She won one, and she didn't win the other. It doesn't mean the election's over. I think if you recollect, Barack Obama won Iowa, lost New Hampshire, went on to win the nomination. So I think history has demonstrated that these two events are important, but they're not the end all by any means. And it was what I was making reference to is the excitement that both she and Bernie Sanders, and quite frankly, even the Republican side of the aisle, was seeing incredible numbers come out for them as well in terms of this primary, that bodes well for our democracy. And I think that Hillary Clinton, when she becomes the nominee, that she will also, the designee and the nominee for President of the United States, she'll benefit from the excitement that both she and Bernie Sanders have been able to create around this election.
Other questions?
I go back to Flint. Would you support the White House declaring Flint a federal disaster area? That's an argument some Republicans have made. It would free up billions of dollars in emergency federal spending.
Well, it is a disaster area, but it's not a natural disaster area. It's a man-made disaster, and the people who created the crisis should step to the plate and be accountable. And so federal taxpayers, I believe, as Mr. Kildee has introduced legislation, that federal taxpayers would be willing to work to help their brothers and sisters in Flint, Michigan, because for them, it's not a matter of getting a solution way into the tomorrow. It's about getting it yesterday, because their kids are having to figure out how to live and drink and play and do all the things we expect them to do and learn after they've been poisoned by lead. And so we need to act now. And it would be selfish of us as a country, as a family, if we said, no, the governor and his folks at the state government level caused this crisis, so it's going to be only the governor who comes to the plate. If the governor is AWOL, if he doesn't want to step to the plate, are we going to let the families in Flint, Michigan just exist with lead water? No, I think all of us figure you have to step to the plate. But clearly, the buck stops with the governor, and I think if the governor is the governor is the one that has to come to the table and come up with a meaningful solution. But I believe what Mr. Kildee is doing, and many of us will support, is a solution now. Just because the governor is being derelict doesn't mean we have to be derelict and watch our family members, because that's the American family. I may not have family directly in Flint, Michigan, but I guarantee you, I represent the people in Michigan as I represent the people in Los Angeles, and we need to act. And by the way, I should mention, we have a crisis in Los Angeles that I want to raise too. We have a battery plant that was operating in the environs of the city of Los Angeles for years, causing pollution. Some 10,000 homes in the LA area may have been contaminated by lead, some severely. We're not able to get full action by the company that caused the pollution, which is on the verge of declaring bankruptcy to protect itself from this stuff. We need to be able to go after the culprits, but we don't need to wait until the people who are responsible decide to step to the plate before we decide to act.
If I could just comment on the question, it's important to keep in mind that the president has mobilized the federal government. In fact, just yesterday, the Small Business Administration approved disaster loans to businesses that are struggling as a result of this crisis. And one thing I'll say that I agree with Rick Snyder about is that he did not just create an emergency. Rick Snyder created a disaster. The question is whether it fits what has been the traditional and now clearly statutory definition of what constitutes a disaster. But for those voices, particularly those Republican members who have spoken up and have said that it warrants a substantial federal response, I would welcome their co-sponsorship on my legislation. It's not just up to the administration. Congress has within its authority to act, and the president has already indicated that he would support such legislation. So it's a very simple step for those who are arguing for a federal role, and that is to join with us and put together bipartisan legislation to help the people of Flint.
Well, look, they've got a bill they're putting up this week that really is not a solution, and we hope they don't try to frame that as the solution to the problem. It does nothing to get the governor to act. So we hope they will come forward with us on some meaningful action at the federal level, understanding that the real accountability lies with the governor and the state. But we're ready to act. Many of us are saying we're ready to act. Let's take one last question, then we'll break. Mike.
You said that Donovan's message this morning was that President Obama would support an emergency stop. Are they endorsing any type of figure as they come back?
I'm going to go first.
They want your bill?
We had some discussion this morning. They have some ideas to add to the legislation that I proposed, but I don't want to speak for them. I will just say that what Senator Stabenow and Senator Peters have been doing in the Senate has been pretty remarkable, getting this conversation to the point where we can have a realistic shot at getting a supplemental is due to their tenacity. my hope is that ultimately when there is legislation, it will be broad-based, that it will not just be focused on infrastructure, but it will also focus on the emergent needs, public health, but most importantly, the ongoing needs to support the ability of kids basically to overcome the developmental challenge that has now been thrown in front of them, and that is the behavioral, cognitive, developmental impact of lead. So the discussions that I've had with, just briefly this morning with Mr. Donovan, indicate that they're supportive of the approach we are taking, but that we'll continue to have discussion with them as to what all the elements might be.
But they're going to wait for Congress. They're not going to request any number.
I can't say that. I mean, I think this will be a collaborative effort, and I can't say exactly how that'll roll itself out, but they're very much supportive, and I look forward to working with them and other members of Congress. And I'll just say one last thing. Coming from Flint, it means a lot to me and the people I represent to have our caucus leadership, our leadership of the entire caucus supportive. Members of Congress came last Saturday. We have another group of members coming on March 4. You know, for a community that sometimes feels like it has been left behind when they're in crisis, it's nice to know that folks are willing to stand up for them. I just hope that we get support on the other side of the aisle so that all these sentiments can actually translate into help for the people that really need it.
I think what's important here to understand is putting the numbers aside. I think that's something that we can work out. If Republicans actually come to the table and want to talk about the numbers. What the people of Flint, Michigan want to know is whether or not their government, their country, has their back. That's what they're looking for. They want, and our constituents, my constituents want to know whether or not I have Flint, Michigan's back. Javier Becerra's constituents want to know whether or not he has Flint, Michigan's back. We know Dan Kildee does. Does the rest of the Congress have the back of Flint, Michigan when something like this happens? You know, we've had the issues of clean water and water safety, especially during this time of terrorism. The federal government is very much involved in securing aquifers and in upstate New York, reservoirs from foreign attack. What happened here, though not a foreign attack, is no less poisonous to the people of this community. And in effect, that's what's happened here. And whether or not the government of Michigan is able to address this issue, as I've said before, they bankrupted, in many respects, in my opinion, their ability to do that because they helped cause it. I think there is a role, and it's now time, putting aside whether the president declares it a national emergency or national disaster, the Congress can act, and now's the time for Republicans to come to the table. Democrats have demonstrated we're willing to do that, want to do that. The president's indicated that he will sign legislation to help Michigan. It's now time to step forward to demonstrate that they have the back of the people of Flint, the people of Michigan, because their constituents expect them to as well.
Mike, if you have any follow-up, we can do that later on. But let me go ahead and break. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.